Okay, thank you all for coming. Today I'm going to be talking about the Drupal experience and share with you some thoughts about introducing people to Drupal and just thinking through different people's experience of Drupal and the Drupal community. So before I start, just a bit of an introduction. My name is Suzanne Dergacheva. I work at a Drupal agency in Montreal called Evolving Web, and I run a Drupal training program. And I'm also just newly elected as a board member of the Drupal Association, which is super fun. So if you have ideas, come talk to me. And just an extra little note about what I do. A lot of my work is going around and helping organizations build their Drupal expertise. So I do a lot of trainings for developers and site admins and content editors. So if you're at all interested in that or you know anyone who is, please reach out to me. So as always here at DrupalCon, or at large Drupal events like Drupal Europe, I go around and talk to people about how they're using Drupal, what's going on, what challenges they're facing. And in recent years, and this event is no exception, I hear a lot of the same patterns over and over again. So I hear that people are talking about being challenged by marketing Drupal and promoting Drupal. Drupal adoption seems to be a big challenge for people. I also hear this challenge of finding new developers, recruiting new developers, onboarding new people on Drupal. People keep making comments about gray hair in the Drupal community and the fact that Drupal isn't as popular for young developers as it used to be. So this is another challenge. We also maybe face a challenge because people coming to Drupal for the first time maybe can't easily figure out if it's for them, if it's the right fit. Like, why should I use Drupal? And so we hear about these challenges, but at the same time, we're here at Drupal Europe, and we're all like, oh, but we love Drupal. Like, there's these challenges, but we use Drupal all the time. Like, this isn't a problem for us. We're already in the Drupal community. We already are kind of on the bandwagon. We're already drinking the Kool-Aid. We all love Drupal. So why should we kind of care about this? And I think that the reason this should be important for us is because we want to bring more people into our community. We want to be able to convince those other people that Drupal is the right fit for them, or that they should start developing on Drupal. And in order to do this, we have to kind of think outside of our own little box, our own culture of loving Drupal. We need to think about how other people perceive Drupal when they first hear about it, or when they first come to a Drupal event, or when they first download the software, or maybe when they're just seeing it on a list of CMS options. And the way that I want to think about this Drupal experience today is from a design thinking perspective. So I'm a trainer, so I love to do like the audience interaction thing. And I know this is a massive room, but I want to ask you, so how many of you have heard of design thinking? It's kind of this buzzword. Yeah, design thinking is all the rage. So design thinking is this process of thinking through problems that you can use when you're designing something, and not just a visual design, but if you're designing some kind of a solution, it could be a software solution or just like an organizational solution. And so we can use design thinking to help us improve both the Drupal project, the Drupal community, and everything in between. So here's how we're going to think about it. So design thinking, we're going to start off by trying to empathize with people. So rather than just thinking like, oh, well, we know Drupal really well, so we can make Drupal more accessible to people. Instead, we're going to try and empathize with those people and see things from their perspective. So that's what we're going to start with. Then we're going to define the problem a little bit more, think through like what problems are there, how can we fix them, come up with some ideas before we move on to actual solutions. So what is the Drupal experience? We could see this from so many perspectives. So I could have I guess we're going to do a group photo at some point here, but this is a photo from, I think, DrupalCon Nashville. Thousands of attendees there. Drupal users from all different kinds of backgrounds. And in any big group of Drupalers, for sure at this event, we're going to be able to find people that fit all kinds of labels. So when you think of people who use Drupal, that could be so many different types of people. That could be a developer, designer, a contributor, someone who's a project manager, someone who's just a salesperson. Maybe they're selling Drupal, or maybe they're using Drupal as a sales tool. Or it could be somebody who's a business owner, or maybe they run an NGO, and they're trying to use Drupal as a tool in their organization. So we can apply all kinds of labels to people. And we can say, oh, well, how does a sysadmin see Drupal? Or how does a freelance designer use Drupal? But I think it might be more useful, rather than just trying to think through these labels, to think about the user journeys that these people go through. So why is a user journey better? So the reason being that if you had to apply this one of these labels to yourself, I'm willing to bet that most of you and most of the people here at this event wouldn't just pick one label. You'd probably pick 2 or 3 of these, right? Like if you think of yourself like, am I just a developer? Sometimes I feel like a sysadmin. Or am I really just a designer? Because sometimes I write CSS. So it's likely that more than one label applies to each person. And it's also likely that you might start off as a designer and end up becoming a developer. Or you start off just doing some marketing with Drupal, and then you realize, oh, I can actually build out Drupal sites. I have that expertise. So I'm gonna, instead of focusing on personas that could be really specifically defined, I'm going to think more about the user journeys of all these people coming to Drupal. And the reason that I first got interested in this and in thinking about user journeys, it was because I am doing so much training in which I get to go and talk to so many new Drupalers about how they're using Drupal. So often when I run trainings, I'll go and spend a week with a group of people who are brand new to Drupal. So I'll go and I'll hang out with them. And usually on the first day of training, I'll go around the room and say, hey, who are you? What do you do? And usually people apply one of those persona labels. They'll say, oh, I'm a front-end developer, or oh, I'm a project manager, I'm not very technical. And they'll apply these labels to themselves. But as we go through the training, the 1 day, 2 days, the week, even longer training, I'll come back and do some more training with them, and then I'll learn that they actually have more of a story than that, and often they won't give themselves enough credit for the background that they have. Or they'll apply one label, but then it turns out that actually this project manager is planning to build a Drupal theme. So often the story is a bit more complex. So I want you to think back now to your own user journey in Drupal and how it all started for you. So close your eyes. Don't fall asleep, it's 4 p.m., but just close your eyes and think, okay, how did I first hear about Drupal? Maybe you saw Drupal in a list of CMSs that you were going to try out. Or maybe it was a Drupal install screen that you saw, and you were like, oh, I guess I have to install this new thing and figure out how it works. Or maybe you view sourced on your page, and you were like, oh, what CMS is being used to run my website? Oh, I see this Drupal thing popping up everywhere. So think about your own journey through Drupal. And there's some really common ones. So some people come to Drupal because somebody told them about it. Sometimes they're forced into it, like, oh, here's a project. It's running on this CMS called Drupal. So you just get it thrust upon you. Sometimes you're just trying to build your first site and you come across it. There's lots of different ways that people might first first learn about Drupal and first start their journey. And so I'm going to go through some examples, examples of people that I've met, and so we'll think a little bit about how these user journeys went, and also what challenges people faced, what highlights people had. So some different things I'll kind of point out about these user journeys. So first of all, meet Carolina. So Carolina probably would identify herself as a site builder, maybe a beginner developer. And she does use the command line. Carolina's background is in science, so she did a master's, I think, in biology, and she has learned some web basics. Like, she took some course back in the day, and then she's used Drupal kind of as a tool, as a content editor, so she's familiar with it. And she got this website. She's starting to learn the basics, and then she went to her first Drupal camp. She went to Drupal camp in New Jersey, which is where I met her. And then just with that experience of like kind of hearing about Drupal, having a little bit of web design background, she decided that for this new nonprofit that she's working for, she would offer to build their website in Drupal, which is great. It's a great story. So she's kind of like got the seed. She's gotten a little further because this Drupal camp was going on. That really helped her. And now she's on her journey, on her way to build this website. And so there's two ends to the story, right? Like, either the website, that could go really well and she could launch her website, or maybe she gets stuck along the way and it could be that she's not able to succeed. And the kind of sticking point for her, the thing that got her kind of struggling a little bit with this journey, was when she was thinking about how she would get her website online. And Caroline is really, really smart, so she didn't do this like at the end of the building of the website. She was actually asking about it more like in the middle of building the website. She's like, how am I actually going to put my website online? And because she's never done this before, she's just kind of new to Drupal, new to anything beyond just basic HTML and CSS. She doesn't know about like, different deployment options, like different hosting providers. And so just this question could get her really hung up. She wasn't sure how to proceed. Okay, our next user is Sam. So Sam is more of an administrator, project manager. He's maybe considers himself a beginner developer, wants to learn how to do web development, but he's not there yet. So his background is totally non-technical, and he learned Drupal on the job. So he works for a university, and so the university uses Drupal quite a bit. And he had an agency come in and upgrade their website to Drupal 8. So it's like a faculty website, and the website was upgraded. So now he's running on Drupal 8. So he's just been administering this site, maybe doing some project management of the developers, but he doesn't know much about the code himself. He doesn't know much about how all of that works. He's not looking at module code or theme code or anything like that. But he has been maintaining this site. So I would say, like, he wouldn't consider himself a beginner Drupal user because he does have this experience. And the part where Sam got really stuck is with Drupal 8. The site was handed off to him from the agency, like, here you go, good luck with all that. And he realized that Drupal 8 is different from Drupal 7, and that the agency had used, like we all should use, like configuration management. And so he had heard about this, and we've all heard about this, but for Sam, this was a challenge because he didn't know the right workflow to use to keep his configuration up to date. So he wasn't sure like how to set up the workflow between his development site and his production site. So this was where Sam got stuck. Gina is a developer. So her background is in programming. She has experience with various programming languages. And her manager decided that her organization was going to switch to Drupal, and they were going to use it to build out a new intranet. So they made this decision, and so Gina got started. She's like, great, I'm excited about this new project. I'm going to install Drupal. So she got Drupal all installed, and she's starting to build out this intranet. And Gina's background, like, she is very technical, so a lot of the things that non-technical folks might get stuck on were easy for her. So like, you know, just setting Drupal up, knowing about all the dependencies, starting to configure her site, like everything seemed to make sense to her. But then she got stuck on some of the terminology. So she wasn't sure, like, what's the difference between a block and a view, and she was getting stuck on some of just the best practices. She wanted to do things the Drupal way, but she really didn't have like a clear guide as to what that was. So terminology and just like best practices really got Gina stuck. And because she's got a technical background, she was actually more frustrated because she thought these things should be easy, but she was just having trouble figuring out how to do things right in Drupal. So last example, we have Chris. So Chris's user journey started out, his background is in marketing, so that's what he studied in school. And he is the marketing director for, I believe, a nonprofit organization. He was evaluating Drupal because it was in a list of CMSs that he thought he should use. His organization wanted to use something open source. He went to a Drupal event, and at the event, he was able to start just with a Drupal install. And so he set up a demo site with Drupal. And if Chris were doing this today, it would be even easier, right? Because he's got the Umami install profile. But even just like with the basic install profile, Chris was able to get this set up. And that seems like a win. It seems like, oh yeah, Chris is on the road to using Drupal. He's already like gone to a Drupal event, figured out how to install Drupal, and he's seen what it can do. But actually, he couldn't figure out what to do next, because when you first install Drupal, it's not like you get this manual in the mail that tells you exactly what to do next and exactly what steps to take to get your site up and running. So he was just kind of like not sure actually how to evaluate if Drupal did everything he needed to do. He kind of had a checklist of like, I need this, 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 and this on my site, and he didn't know actually if Drupal was able to do it. Because even though he saw the site that was installed, it wasn't set up to be the site like that he would want. So that's where Chris got stuck. So we can think about all these different types of users from really different backgrounds, interacting with Drupal, having their first experiences, and then getting stuck on different things. And everybody, of course, is going to get stuck on something when they're learning something new. So our next challenge is really to define what the problems are. Like what are the, throughout the user journey, like what are the important moments? But I want to be really positive in this presentation. I don't want to just talk about challenges. So some of the things that are highlights in all of these stories, because all of these stories have really happy moments. A lot of the highlights for people when they're first starting to use Drupal, it's often going to an event like this, going to a DrupalCon or a Drupal camp or some other event. You have a lot of aha moments as well with Drupal, I think, when you're like first using it. There's always something that gets people excited, like, oh, I can just make a content type, or I can just make a view. And these things are really, really exciting for people. Often, people get excited just when they get help for the first time from somebody with their Drupal project. They realize, like, oh, wow, the community is really, really encouraging, and like I can just go on Slack, or I can come to an event like this, and somebody's going to help me. Like, that is often surprising to people who have never worked in open source and have never worked with a project like Drupal, where people are actually very friendly. And then often you get this other moment when you get to help someone else with their problem, and that's another point where people get really into it, really excited. Of course, launching your site, contributing, these are all really motivating things for people. But there are also lots of gaps and kind of typical moments where people get stuck. So along the journey, there are often places where people kind of get a bit overwhelmed. And these might be reasons why people stop using Drupal, why people say, oh, well, I'm just going to go back to my default CMS that I use for something else, or I'm just going to abandon this project, or I'm going to pass this off to someone else because it's too hard for me. And often that happens with things like terminology, like people just getting confused about workflows and environments, simple things like where and how do I deploy my site. Security updates are often something people mention. And figuring out the Drupal way. So, if somebody is looking for a solution and they realize there's 10 ways to do this, they might just get really overwhelmed and give up. And I think the thing to point out about these gaps in people's journeys, it's not that it's a problem for people to struggle. Like, things are hard, you have to learn new stuff, that's normal. But the problem is more when this causes anxiety. So if you are having trouble learning something, you kind of feel like it's this challenge, and maybe you're not up to the challenge. Should I even be here? It's kind of like this thing we talk about sometimes, like imposter syndrome, like, oh, maybe I'm not really a developer. Like, oh, my background isn't technical, and now I'm trying to learn how to do this technical thing. Maybe this just isn't the right place for me. And people, I think, find that they have anxiety because they think that they have trouble with this and it must be easier for everyone else. And so I think the real thing that we can help with here is to just help people feel like, no, it's normal to find this confusing. Like, yes, if you are doing figuring out your development workflow for the first time, this is going to be hard. This isn't something you're just going to figure out like that. You're going to have to map it out and do some learning. It's hard for everybody. So I think when we go through this list of gaps that these users have in their journeys, we need to think about how we can support these people and just make their journey smoother. So if someone's having problems like figuring out where to put their website online, like maybe that's something we can improve in the user journey by giving people better cues, better pointers. And so we can go through these problems that people have and come up with ways to support them. And it doesn't just have to be like making the software better. Like, I think that's something we often jump to. Like, we're technical in the Drupal community, and we're like, oh yeah, we can just fix this by making the Drupal project better. But I think a lot of these things are actually things we can fix with community solutions, or with just better communication, or better materials for people, or helping structure Drupal events in a way that will support these people better. And that's where we get to the ideate phase. So it's like we've thought through different people's experiences. We've kind of defined some different gaps in how people are approaching Drupal and how they're learning Drupal. And then we can think through what are some ways that we can support these people and make the process better. So how do we design a better experience for all of them? And of course, there's many, many ideas we're going to have, many solutions, because there's so many different journeys and so many different gaps. So this isn't just like a one-fixed solution where we're going to do one little thing and it's going to solve all the problems. It's something that we're going to have to work towards, we can work towards as a community. So you might be sitting there thinking, wait a second, I've heard about some of these gaps before. Isn't there some kind of a module that can just fix all of this? So tomorrow morning, Dries is going to stand up here. He's going to be talking about all the new things in Drupal, and he's going to be talking about some of these points up here. These are all things that are being worked on already to improve the Drupal experience. So things like the out-of-the-box initiative. Who here has tried the new Umami profile? No one? Okay, homework, all of you. Install the newest version of Drupal and try out this new install profile. So the out-of-the-box initiative was set up so that out of the box, people, especially evaluating Drupal or trying it for the first time, would be able to see what Drupal can do. So one of the install profiles now, in addition to the standard install profile, is this Umami's profile that actually has content and content types set up that you can use. There's also the Admin UI initiative. So how many people have heard about this? It's a big room, but I can see all of you. 3 people. OK, so definitely you have to come to the Dries Note tomorrow to hear more about this. This is the initiative to help to basically recreate a better admin UI that's going to be more user-friendly, and that's going to be modernized, so it's going to be JavaScript-based. And part of this is really all about just like making the Drupal admin UI better, more user-friendly. Core updates through the UI. So this is something that is being worked on by the community that will help with things like security updates, people's anxiety about that. Backwards compatibility, just the whole way that Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 are structured will provide a much smoother upgrade path in the future. So this is something that I know is a gap that I didn't mention in any of the user journeys, but definitely upgrading is a reason a lot of people stop using Drupal. And this, in addition to all these developer tools that have come out recently. So if you're a developer, you're using Drupal 8, you've probably tried out the Drupal console. So that's a great tool to help with the developer experience. Also things like Lando for setting up a development environment, and there are lots of other options in addition to Lando. So there's tons of tools for developers out there to help them with their experience. And in addition to all of this, so there's tons of work just being done in the Drupal project in general. So if you are not up to date on those, again, come to the Dries Note, and then there's also some initiative pages now on Drupal.org where you can stay up to date on what's being done. But I also want you to sit there, not just and think, OK, like, what is being done to solve this problem? Like, this is open source, right? So we should all be asking, what can I do to improve the Drupal experience? Like, the Drupal experience, it's not just about the experience of using Drupal, the software. It's also about us as the community. So I think one of the key takeaways is that we have to be honest about Drupal being challenging. And just being honest about it is going to help us empathize with people and help people feel less anxiety. So if we're writing blog posts about how challenging it was for us to figure out a development workflow and what we did to fix that, that's going to help people. Or if we greet newcomers and we ask them about what they're having trouble with, and we just empathize with them and tell them, like, yeah, that was hard for me to learn too. That kind of story is really going to help people feel like they can get over those gaps. Community participation is a really important thing. I know I've heard from a lot of people that local Drupal communities are getting smaller, and I think that makes it harder for us to help each other and relate to each other. So of course, you can also just, if you're not so much of a go out to a meetup type of person, I mean, just joining Drupal Slack, getting involved that way, and pointing people to that as a resource, I think is huge. So that's one thing. And then just like actively going out and welcoming newcomers. I know there's a lot of new people here at Drupal Europe, a lot of people for whom this is like their first Drupal event. So just welcoming those people and providing advice or mentorship in whatever way you can. It doesn't have to be mentoring them, showing them how to write code. It could be mentoring them in terms of pointing them to the right direction to get support, or just listening to their user journey. Something that I've been working on recently that I'm really excited about is improving the Admin UI. So I already mentioned the Admin UI initiative. And one thing that the part of this that I'm working on is an admin UX study. So instead of just saying, oh, we're going to modernize Drupal, some of us are thinking, OK, we should actually go out and look at how people are currently using Drupal and other CMSs and make sure that the new admin UI is actually user-friendly and test how people use it. So if you're interested in helping out with this, we have a group of us that are working on creating user tests and running those tests. So if you're at all interested in user experience work or research, you can come help us out. So we're doing a BOF on Thursday, and there's also an email address there that you can use to get in touch with us, adminuxstudy@gmail.com. And then there's also a couple links to things we're currently working on. So there's a survey that we've done of content editors, and you can check out some results from that at that link. And if you know content editors, you can ask them to participate by sending them the link to that card sort exercise. So this is a thing that we're doing to try and make the Drupal experience better for content editors. And we're focusing on content editors because that's one of those personas that sometimes gets overlooked, because usually content editors aren't the ones coming to Drupal camps and Drupal cons and participating in Drupal.org. So we're trying to give those people a voice. You've also probably heard of the Promote Drupal campaign. Anybody heard of this? Gone to this page? Yeah, so there's like progress being made on the Promote Drupal campaign in that there has been some money raised, and there's a plan for that money to go towards promoting Drupal. So there's more information about that at drupal.org/promote-drupal, and you can also stay tuned for more updates. If you are here at Drupal Europe and you want to get involved in promoting Drupal in the European community, there's also a roundtable that's happening tomorrow afternoon. So if you want to really promote Drupal and you're looking for like tools and resources for how to do that, like you want to have some copy to use, you want to have some press releases, you want to have some actual marketing materials, come talk to me after, and I'll make sure you're at that roundtable tomorrow, part of that discussion. So we only got through empathize, define, and ideate, and we kind of started to talk about some solutions. So, you know, prototyping and testing are part of design thinking as well, and it's important that we try out some of these things. So we're here at Drupal Europe today. Next year, at the next conference, we should have, you know, tried implementing some of these things, and we should be coming back and evaluating, like, okay, is the content editor experience better now? Do we have better guides for people in these going through these different user journeys? Like, are we helping people who are trying to implement a development workflow or deploying their site? And we should be testing things that we're doing so that we can always be going back and making improvements. And I think the great thing is that we are part of an open source community, so it's not us sitting as individuals trying to solve this problem. We're trying to solve it together. So I think we all have something to contribute to this, whether it's improving the UX of Drupal, whether it's supporting users, whether it's welcoming new developers, or actually being part of a marketing campaign. But I think the most important thing is that we don't just try and sit as individuals and try and solve this, but actually to come together and try and solve it collectively, because it's something that that will affect all of us and will affect the Drupal project. So thank you very much for coming to the presentation. I feel like this isn't a presentation where people usually have like questions. It's more of a presentation where people have like comments, like, yeah, and what about this user journey, and how can we do this? So I would love to invite you to comment on anything I've said, or of course ask questions as well. Guys, you're here for the exciting part, it's the questions. Come on in, come on in. Well, I'm gonna talk for 30 more seconds so that you can all think of something to say. So who are all of you people? What user journeys have you gone on? How many people here are involved in their local communities? Some of you, yeah, like a bunch of you. Everybody who comes to Drupal Europe, they're involved. And how many of you are like pretty new to Drupal? Like any of you, like this is your first experience? Yeah, so we'll definitely want to talk to all of you later and ask you, how are we doing so far? You can evaluate the process. You know, I was installing some different content management systems recently. I was like thinking outside the box. Okay, like I want to know what it's like to first use Squarespace, right? Has anyone done this? Like just go install some random CMS. Graph CMS, how does that work? I keep hearing about it. Yeah, it's a really interesting process. So like CMSs that you buy, they actually have a whole onboarding process. Like you sign up, and then they keep sending you emails like, oh, can I help you with this? Like, oh, next you might want to try creating some content. It's a really interesting learning experience. So this is something that I've been doing to learn more. Anyone else have anything to share like this? Chris, awesome. Yeah, this is a great question, yeah. So the question is about the Drupal adoption going down and the Drupal community shrinking and whether this is actually a problem. So my first slide originally was a graph, you know, like the graphs on the project pages where you can see how many people install this module. Well, there's one for like how many people install Drupal, and you can see like the line for Drupal 8 is going up so slowly. So that was my first slide, and then I was like, oh, that's too negative. And also those numbers are not quite accurate because not everybody reports that they're using Drupal. So I was like, oh, just remove that. But that is a good point that there's this feeling that like less people are using Drupal these days, there's less adoption. But I think the real story is like kind of like what you mentioned, like it's changing. The types of people who are starting to use Drupal are changing. It's not so much these smaller websites. It's less kind of community websites. It's less websites that are. Yeah. So like the number of websites that are running Drupal 8, like maybe this isn't as many as we would like to see. But I think the real story is that, yeah, like that it's changing. You're getting a lot bigger projects being run on Drupal. You're getting kind of more enterprises using Drupal. Maybe they're a bit less involved in the community. So I don't think that this is necessarily a problem. It's going to change the user stories that we see. So like the stories that I mentioned, kind of a range, like what you might start to see more of is like, you know, this chief marketing officer picks Drupal, right? Like that kind of a user story, where it's one person deciding to use Drupal, but maybe that actually means that there's 100 websites built in Drupal from this one organization. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem, but it is something that will inevitably change the community and change the type of usership that Drupal has. So yeah, it's a good thing to be aware of, and that's part of how to figure that out, because statistics can be misleading, is to ask the question at DrupalCon, you know, yeah, like, how are you using Drupal? What is your story? We might find that people maybe don't get involved in the community as much as like in terms of those people selecting Drupal, but the developers might be still involved. So I think that kind of thing will definitely change. Anything else? Yeah, Peter? Oh, yeah. Yeah, there is. Yeah, so Peter is asking about documentation. He read an article comparing WordPress to Drupal, and you didn't say what the conclusion of the article was, but I'm assuming that there was something there that said Drupal documentation could be better. So yeah, there is work being done on this. There was a session earlier today about the Drupal.org updates, what's being done there. And I know from the update that Tim was giving at our board meeting yesterday that there has been work done already to refresh these pages, but I think this is an ongoing initiative. So I also think that there's work being done just this week at the code sprints. I know Joe is here from Lullabot, and he's working on improving documentation as part of Drupal. But this is a huge project. Obviously, we have so much documentation for so many different modules, as well as Drupal core. And I think often what's missing, like you can do a lot of work to clean up just all the documentation, the thousands and thousands of pages, and that's a huge job. But I think something that might take a bit more strategic thinking is coming up with the right kind of high-level walkthrough guides. So less like the detailed technical documentation, which will also involve work, but coming up with documentation for each of these kind of user journeys, like, oh, are you a marketing person considering Drupal, or are you a single person creating a whole website versus are you like a technical team? So like having materials aimed at these different types of users, I think, would be useful, making sure we have that on Drupal.org as well. Other ideas, comments, questions? Oh, one last one, great. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So what's your name? Patrick. Okay. So Patrick was asking about for the user's journey of project managers and how best to kind of onboard them onto Drupal, because they need to know some technical things, but not all the details. And I think with project managers, what I find is really useful are giving them a lot of examples, like giving them a lot of case studies into how Drupal was used for other projects. And I know case studies are often used for marketing materials, so I'm thinking more of like a honest case study, like a case study that you wouldn't record at a DrupalCon because you were like, oh, I don't want all those details to be recorded on tape. So, you know, telling project managers about how other Drupal projects have gone, both the timelines and like what modules were used, how the modules were, like what you get out of a module versus what you have to develop custom, and just being able to manage people's expectations. Because often when you start using Drupal, you look at all the possibility. You're like, oh yeah, there's a module for commerce, and there's a module that integrates with this CRM, and there's a module that gives me multilingual. So you think that this is all really easy because you have modules. Whereas in fact, you often have a lot of work to do to customize these solutions and do the integrations. So I think project managers definitely do need a basic introduction to how Drupal works, just to understand this terminology, be able to communicate with developers. And then I also think that they need the kind of honest case studies where they can look at how other projects have gone and what the breakdown was between different types of work on those projects, who had to be involved, and how much effort went into them. Okay. I'm getting the look that the time is up. Thank you all for coming, and I'd love to continue the conversation. So please come to the BOF on Thursday about the UX study, or come talk to me about Promote Drupal. Tell me what you think the Drupal Association should do, and definitely come here tomorrow morning for the Dries Note to get all the other updates about what's going on to make Drupal user journeys better. Thanks, everyone.